There you go, Will. Oh, hello again. I'm Professor Pipes, and today I'm here to tell you about Act 2 of William Shakespeare's Romeo and Juliet. But before we begin, let's recap Act 1. The Montague and Capulet families hate each other, which is unfortunate because Romeo Montague and Juliet Capulet have fallen in love at first sight at a party thrown by Juliet's dad. To add more conflict to this already problematic situation, Paris, a relative of the town's prince, attended this same party because he is also in love with Juliet. To top it all off, Tybalt, Juliet's cousin, vowed revenge on Romeo for crashing the party. Act 2 begins immediately following this eventful soiree, so let's talk summary. Don't forget, this doesn't replace actually reading the story or watching a play, but hopefully it helps you to better understand what's going on. In Act 2, Scene 1, even though the party is over, Romeo decides he can't leave because his heart, Juliet, is here. So he jumps over a wall. No, not me, Cooper. Romeo! I mean, that wasn't me. I would never hop a fence and certainly don't advocate hopping fences. Anyway, Romeo jumps a wall into Juliet's backyard. Just then, his friends approach the wall, looking for him. They suspect he's nearby, and just like a good friend, Mercutio knows exactly how to get a rise out of Romeo. So he makes a bunch of dirty jokes about Rosaline, hoping that will make Romeo mad enough to come out. Of course, it doesn't work, since, unbeknownst to his friends, Romeo loves Juliet now. When Romeo doesn't come out, his friends give up and leave. Scene 2 is the ever-popular balcony scene. Romeo sees Juliet in her window and delivers his famous speech, calling Juliet the sun. He then listens in as Juliet is thinking aloud, saying, "Romeo, Romeo, wherefore art thou Romeo?" Which doesn't actually mean, "Where are you, Romeo?" She's not like, "Ooh, creepy stalker, where are you?" It actually means, "Why are you Romeo?" She's upset because he's the one person in the world that she's not supposed to fall in love with, but she did. She says that she wishes Romeo would just give up his name and be with her, as if it were that easy. Romeo takes this opportunity to hop out of the shadows, revealing himself to Juliet. Surprisingly, she is not terrified by the person lurking in her yard, and the two teens vow their love for each other. Aww. Eventually, though, Juliet says things are happening too fast. It's about time someone started thinking logically. Then she steps inside for a minute, and comes back out saying they should get married. Tomorrow! Wasn't she just talking about taking things slowly? What the heck happened? They just met and already she wants to get married. Crazy girlfriend alert! Run, Romeo, run! Luckily for her, I guess, Romeo is equally impulsive and says yes. Then they spend a bunch of time flirtily saying goodbye. They're like that couple going, "You hang up first. No, you hang up first." Annoying. In Scene 3, we meet someone new. No, Cooper, it's not Ryan Reynolds. Yes, I know that would be cool, but why would Ryan Reynolds be in this play? It's Friar Laurence. Yep, there he is. Friar Laurence is a priest or a pastor, whatever you want to call it, and he's friends with Romeo. He is tending his plants. Spoiler alert, the fact that he knows his way around plants is going to be important later on. Anyway, Romeo comes in to ask if he'll marry Romeo and Juliet. To each other. It's not a throuple situation. Friar Laurence at first thinks Romeo's crazy since he had just been here to whine about his love for Rosaline the other day. But he eventually agrees because this alliance may so happy prove to turn your household's rancor to pure love. In other words, he thinks it'll end the family feud. In Scene 4, we meet back up with Benvolio and Mercutio, who are worried because they heard that Tybalt wants to fight Romeo, and they think he's too heartbroken over Rosaline to fight. Speak of the lovesick devil, Romeo enters, and much to his friend's surprise, he's in a super happy mood. It's almost like it's his wedding day or something. The three of them make fun of each other for a while, and then the nurse appears to talk to Romeo. Mercutio makes a bunch of dirty jokes about her, basically calling her an old, ugly prostitute, and makes fun of her, but she just thinks he's flirting. Romeo's friends leave, and Romeo tells the nurse that Juliet should lie to her parents and say she's going to church for confession this afternoon, when really, he'll be there to marry her instead. Even though the nurse mentions that she still thinks that Paris is better, she says she's thrilled. Awkward and inappropriate as always. In scene 5, Juliet is super impatiently waiting for the nurse to come back and tell her what Romeo said. Finally, the nurse enters, all out of breath and tired, and she keeps messing with Juliet by almost telling her what Romeo said, and then changing the subject. Eventually, she guilts and teases Juliet into giving her a back rub, then tells her the plan. In scene 6, Romeo and Friar Laurence are waiting for Juliet, and the friar is trying to lecture him about the necessity of taking things slowly. But just like a teenager sitting in English class, Romeo is paying absolutely no attention, particularly when his girl arrives. Romeo and Juliet start getting all nauseatingly flirty until the friar jumps between them and says clearly he can't trust them alone together. So he'd better get them hitched right now. Aw, they get married and live happily ever after. Wait, there's 3 more acts? And it's a tragedy. Okay, so maybe happily ever after won't last that long, but for now we can pretend that everything is great and ignore the impending doom. Yay, hooray, happy. Now we should probably talk about the dynamic character shifts of both Romeo and Juliet. In Act 1, we know that Romeo was kind of a scumbag. He was only interested in Rosaline because he thought she was hot, and he wanted to sleep with her. And in Act 2, when Juliet says she has to leave, Romeo asks, "Wilt thou leave me so unsatisfied?" So it seems like he's the same old horny teen. But then, he makes it clear that the satisfaction he wants is an exchange of vows of love. He even makes arrangements to marry her instead of pressuring her into sex like he had tried to do with Rosaline. He is interested in a long-term commitment now instead of short-term satisfaction. And now for his wife, Juliet. We know that at the start, Juliet was kind of a robot child and was willing to let her parents make all her decisions for her. Had she not met Romeo, she likely would have happily married Paris and followed in her mother's footsteps. And why not? I mean, hello, I'd pick Paul Rudd over Leonardo DiCaprio any day. Sorry, Leo. But once the damage is done, her inner teenage rebel is released, and she says that she would even choose to no longer be a Capulet, just to be with Romeo. Now let's discuss the important themes and motifs in this act. Act 2 is the happiest act in the play because it's characterized by a whole lot of love. We'll get to Romeo and Juliet, but first we should talk about the nurse. Even though she truly believes that Juliet would be better off with Paris, she ultimately just wants her to be happy. So she helps Juliet to get married to the man she loves. The nurse loves Juliet like a daughter and even makes sure to give that cliche parent speech, warning Romeo not to hurt Juliet or lead her on. Friar Laurence demonstrates a type of love we haven't really seen in this play before. It's called agape, which means love for mankind. He shows agape when he puts aside his own concerns because he wants to end the feud and bring peace to his town. Finally, let's discuss the teens. Is their relationship love yet? Let's go over the pros and cons. Pro, they flirt a lot. Con, they only met a few hours ago. Pro, they want to get married. Con, Juliet proposes only moments after saying things were moving too fast, so maybe she's just trying to avoid marrying Paris. Clearly, the couple like each other, but is it true love, lust, flirty puppy love, or just desperation? I'll leave that up to you to decide. Another key theme in this act is identity. During the balcony scene, Juliet talks about what defines identity. In fact, she asks that now famous question, what's in a name? and answers by saying, "That which we call a rose by any other word would smell as sweet." In other words, if you call a rose rotten fish, it's still going to smell nice. According to Juliet, our identities are decided not by our names. They're defined by our characteristics, our personalities, and our choices, who we are on the inside, and not by something outside of our control, like the name we were fated to have. Don't worry, we'll talk about fate soon enough. Juliet even suggests that being together would be as easy as giving up their family names. Next, let's discuss opposition. Friar Laurence brings up a new view of opposition, saying that it kind of provides balance in the world. When tending his plants, he mentions how they are born of the earth, and when they die, they give back to the earth, allowing other plants to live. Then he talks about, you know what, I'd better just go through some of these line by line, because boy, does he know how to ramble. "For naught so vile that on the earth doth live, but to the earth some special good doth give." In other words, he believes that there is nothing so bad that it cannot do some good. This foreshadows the deaths of Romeo and Juliet because, as the prologue tells us, their death, while bad, brings about the end of the feud and thus prevents future injury and death, which is good. Next, he talks about how a particular plant has both poisonous and medicinal qualities, depending upon how it's used. He then relates this to people as a whole, saying, "Two such opposed kings encamp them still, in man as well as herbs, grace and rude will." Basically, he's saying that people have the capacity for both good and bad within them, which again can relate back to Romeo and Juliet. While their love itself can be considered good, these two teens also make dumb, impulsive decisions because of it, which cause them countless problems. Time and age are also discussed at great length in this act. First, we have to talk about how quickly Romeo and Juliet are moving. Think about how much time passed between when they met and when they got married. Couple of weeks? Couple of days? Nope, not even that. They met Sunday night and got married Monday afternoon. Less than 24 hours later. Insanity. Next, while waiting for the news about her upcoming wedding, Juliet talks about how age and emotion are related. She believes that only the young really experience love and emotions, and even goes so far as to say that old folks act as if they're already dead. Rude. In the very next scene, as Friar Laurence and Romeo are waiting for Juliet, the friar tries and fails to tell Romeo that he needs to love moderately and slowly, because that's what long-lasting love does. But does Romeo listen? Of course not. Interestingly, destiny and fate are not really discussed directly in this act very much, but there is a whole lot of foreshadowing, which serves a similar function. Juliet says that she worries their love is too much like lightning, which ceases to be before you can even say it lightens. Similarly, we know that they are going to die young, before their relationship has time to develop. Juliet even says that she's worried she could kill Romeo with much cherishing. This overlap with opposition foreshadows exactly what's going to happen. Romeo will die because of his love for Juliet. In scene 4, the nurse also says some confusing stuff about Romeo and Rosemary, which even Romeo doesn't understand. But let's take a moment to talk about flowers. Did you know that flowers used to have secret meanings? The red rose meant love, the daisy meant innocence, and rosemary? It meant remembrance. Because of this, it was commonly used in both weddings and funerals, foreshadowing how Romeo's marriage will lead to his death. Romeo even says that he doesn't mind if love-devouring death takes him, as long as he gets a moment together with Juliet. So why is all this foreshadowing important? Well, you can look at it two ways. It could indicate that fate is working against Romeo and Juliet, since everything keeps pointing to their deaths. On the other hand, Romeo and Juliet see these signs and even bring them up more than once, suggesting that they're fully aware that their decisions are dangerous and frankly pretty dumb, and yet they continue making them. So, is it fate working against them, or is it really just bad decisions? Finally, let's discuss the motif of light and dark. It's important to note that Romeo and Juliet's most iconic scene occurs at night. This could be suggesting that their love is the symbolic light in the darkness, which is what Romeo seems to be saying when he says that famous line, "But soft, what light through yonder window breaks? It is the east, and Juliet is the sun." However, the darkness of the night usually is symbolic of evil or deception. Yes, Cooper, you do look very scary there. Anyway, their love is indeed dependent on deception. They're lying to everyone around them. And as we already mentioned, Juliet even relates their love to lightning, which is bright but short-lived. Similarly, Friar Laurence relates their love to an explosion of gunpowder. Again, bright, but also destructive and short-lived. It seems that the light in this act is deceptive, as it appears to be good, but ultimately only brings about the darkness, much like the love of Romeo and Juliet and this act itself. As always, I'd like to leave you with some food for thought. Consider these questions as you review this act and continue reading Romeo and Juliet. First, what's with all the foreshadowing in this act? Why bother having so much if we already know from the prologue what's going to happen at the end? Second, what are your thoughts on the nurse? Does she seem to have a good sense of right and wrong, or does she seem easily corrupted or manipulated? Third, make sure you watch a version of the balcony scene. What do you think about it? Does it seem believable? Why or why not? Fourth, does it seem like Romeo and Juliet are the victims of fate or the victims of their own poor decisions? And finally, what do you think of Juliet's statement about identity? Do our names have anything to do with who we are as people? Do you think you would be different if you grew up with a different name? Thanks for watching this episode of Piper's Paraphrases. And, as Juliet said in this very act, parting is such sweet sorrow. Bye!